hear it before you name it, a low metallic hum threaded through your ordinary minutes, the kind of sound that isn't a sound but a pressure, a field, a quiet insistence that the story you have been repeating is only one weave among many, and you are not trapped inside it. You are the hand, you are the shuttle, you are the pattern being pulled from the dark. You feel the loom of time as a tension between breaths. The moment stretches, then thins, like silk pulled to translucence, and through that fragile skin of awareness, you glimpse the gridwork lines of cause and possibility, luminous, intersecting, vibrating with the faint electricity of options not yet chosen. You stand on the catwalk of your own consciousness and look down at the machinery turning, attention as spindle, memory as warp, desire as weft, belief as the foot, treadle that lifts and lowers entire worlds. The realization lands cold and clean. You are not merely passing through time. Time is passing through you. You test the mechanism with a single decision. You pause before reacting, a ruthless stillness that interrupts the old reflex arc. In that stillness window, the wave refuses collapse, and the observer wakes inside your eyes like a star seen between storm clouds. The room doesn't change, yet everything changes. You notice how emotion tries to rush the loom, how fear wants to yank the shuttle in jagged strokes, how the nervous system prefers the predictability of old cloth even when it chafes. You refuse the rush. You set a new cadence. You count the beat, 1 attention, 2 breath, 3 coherence, strike. Patterns expose themselves when you slow them. What you called fate is just velocity. What you called karma is just habit plus momentum. What you called signs are simply entanglements whispering across distance, offering you coordinates in a language the mind learns only when the heart stabilizes. You feel the field press against your skin like wind that never stops blowing. The field is not somewhere else. It is the backstage of your sentences, the pause between your thoughts, the excess meaning shimmering around every object when you stare too long. Destiny is not an arrow but a braid. You begin to sense the blueprint underneath the storyline, geometry humming beneath emotion, a crystalline architecture hidden in the noise, a memory of your most coherent configuration. It does not arrive as content, it arrives as orientation. North becomes inward, forward becomes deeper, action becomes precision. You stop trying to drag outcomes toward you and start letting signals select you. The difference is surgical, the difference is mercy. You feel your biology obey. Micro fluctuations in breath, subtle currents in palms and sternum, a fine snow of sensation along the back of the neck where your awareness meets the world like 2 currents braiding. Coherence is not a mood, it is a frequency discipline. You are teaching your nervous system to stay when the old program tells it to flee or perform. You are teaching your attention to hold a superposition without trembling. Then a small click inside the most dangerous sound in the universe, consent. You consent to become the one who weaves rather than the cloth that's woven. You consent to let the past dissolve as raw material instead of law. You consent to be seen by your own future, and in that mutual gaze the pattern steadies. You are returning to design. You are returning to the original proportion. The loom hums, awaiting instruction. The shuttle is in your hand. The first true thread is already moving. You study the warp, the fixed strands stretched across the frame of your days, and realize they are not fate, but priors, the brain's Bayesian scaffolding forecasting the next second from the last 1,000, conserving energy by predicting you into sameness. You feel how the predictive engine loves inertia. You sense how expectation is a gravity well. What you named personality is largely a set of default predictions. The nervous system keeps caching like old checks. You stop caching them. You watch them try to spend themselves without you. The field notices. You begin with the smallest unit, sensation. Cold air at the nostrils on the in-breath, warmth on the out. The micro-oscillation at the inner ear where balance is negotiated. The shallow tide of interoceptive data informing your sense of me. You do not flee. You index. The map clarifies. Prediction errors appear as sparks. The world is not exactly what the model said it would be. Instead of forcing the world to match, you let the model update. This too is weaving. This too is mercy. Belief emerges as a motor pattern. Watch how shoulders rise when the old story approaches. See how jaw and pelvis agree to clench in chorus. Notice the tiny saccades at the eye's edge as attention rehearses escape. The loom creaks when you try to throw new thread through that old body, so you tune the instrument. You widen peripheral vision until the room softens into a bowl. You lower the breath into the pelvic floor like lowering a lamp into a cavern. You uncurl the tongue from the roof of the mouth and feel how thought loses its hook. These are not rituals. These are levers on the machine. Memory shows up as color corrections over the present, tinting the neutral with the past. You do not argue with color. You change the light. You call in coherence like a precise technician. Breath cadence arranges the neurons like disciplined dancers. Heart rhythm becomes metronome. Vagus nerve descends like a lighthouse beam through the storm, and afferent signals flood upward, telling the ancient midbrain that the tigers are gone, that the gates may open, that novelty is not a threat but a visitor. The warp loosens. Just enough. You hear a line inside the hum. What if the most compassionate thing you could do for the world is to upgrade your predictions? You let that sentence land as if it were an instrument. It is. The longer you hold it without decoration, the more the field begins to phase lock to your restraint. Unnecessary velocities bleed off. Noise reveals its skeleton. The pattern hidden in your failures becomes readable, and you do not flinch from its grammar. It says, repetition was the teacher. It says, the teacher may go. You test selection, a single micro-choice. Instead of grasping for relief, you orient toward precision. You choose a thread not because it feels familiar, but because its vector is true, small, clean, almost austere. You say yes to the email that carries coherence, even if it carries fear with it. You say no to the invitation that flatters the persona, but fractures the timeline. You remove one habit that keeps the nervous system in shallow water. The loom approves. The shuttle slides with less friction. You taste a new economy of attention. Entanglements arrive like messengers. A stranger speaks the phrase you dreamed. A fragment of music follows you between cities. Numbers repeat at thresholds like coordinates spray-painted on the underpass of waking. You do not worship the signs. You negotiate. If the field speaks, you answer with behavior, not superstition. You write the letter. You take the walk. You place the glass of water on the windowsill at dawn and let the solar code saturate the mundane. You give the universe something to push against. It does. Shadow does not vanish when the loom turns saintly. It grows articulate. You notice the urge to dramatize your pain into identity, to hoard the exquisite suffering that made you interesting. You smile without cruelty. You thank the mask for its service and place it down where it can rest without piloting. In that relinquishment, bandwidth returns like a river, finding its old bed. Fresh thread gleams where rust once ate the wire. You feel older and younger in the same breath. This paradox is a coordinate. Mark it. The warp, once rigid, begins to behave like music, fixed lengths tuned to different tensions, resonating when struck by meaning. You realize autonomy is not isolation, it is responsible resonance. You are not severing from the world. You are refusing to let the world choose your frequency. From that refusal, generosity becomes affordable. You can afford to bless what you do not understand. You can afford to love without surveillance. You can afford to be exact. You look again at the frame and recognize it as kindness. Constraints are containers for power. Without a loom, thread is just weather. With a loom, thread becomes language. You have enough structure to speak destiny without shouting. You have sufficient freedom to improvise within law. The field responds to this adulthood like a long-awaited colleague arriving clean and on time. It pulls a chair for you at the drafting table of real outcomes. You set the next instruction with the quiet authority of one who knows the machine from the inside, not louder, truer. The shuttle is poised between your fingers. The warp waits, patient as stars. You choose a line that can carry weight across years, and the pattern, hearing its name at last, leans forward to be made. You turn to the weft, the living thread thrown across the disciplined warp, and feel how action is not a performance, but a frequency carrier, a way of impregnating the day with signals so dense that noise cannot find a foothold. You hold the shuttle like a vow. You do not hurry. You do not stall. You choose the thread whose tone refuses to flatter your impatience. This is not about feeling ready. This is about being exact enough to begin. You test the first pass across, one decisive gesture arranged inside a coherent body, not frantic, precise. You send an email distilled to its vector, shorn of apology. You make a call with your breath in the pelvis, so the voice rides on ground instead of foam. You place your shoes by the door before sleep, so the morning inherits momentum without negotiations. Small acts behave like enzymes, lowering the activation energy of destiny's reaction until the improbable becomes routine and the routine becomes sacred. In chemistry, the solution clarifies when the dissolved finds its lattice. In you, the day clarifies when intention finds its scaffold. You feel resistance rise like static across the skin. The psyche proposes negotiations. Later, when you're at your best, when conditions align, when omens are more photogenic, you decline the theater. You select contact with reality over performance for the imaginary crowd in your head. The field, relieved of spectacle, begins to cooperate openly. Coincidences stop shouting, they start integrating. Serendipity tones down to infrastructure. Emotion attempts a coup, demanding to drive. You repurpose its horsepower without giving it the wheel. Joy becomes voltage, not command. Fear becomes weather report, not law. Grief becomes irrigation, not flood. Anger becomes boundary metallurgy, not shrapnel. You are not suppressing, you are reassigning. The nervous system learns that feeling intensely and acting intelligently are not enemies. Hebbian fibers, neurons that fire together, begin to wire alongside this new choreography. Sensation acknowledged, value assessed, action aligned. The loom hums in approval. You study timing, not clock time, pattern time. Every system advertises its openings by micro-slowing right before a phase transition. The physicists call it critical, slowing down the way a storm's pressure drops before the sky opens. The way a conversation goes quiet, a heartbeat before truth enters, the way your breath lengthens at the lip of a brave sentence. You learn to feel that slack in the mesh and throw your thread then. You stop forcing doors, you start noticing hinges. You arrange your day as a coherent circuit. Morning becomes calibration. Sunlight in eyes, spine aligned, 5 exact breaths, counted like a metronome, tapping the edge of the void. Midday becomes insertion. One hard conversation conducted with low shoulders and a steady gaze. One artifact produced that can carry signal independent of your mood. Evening becomes consolidation. A single paragraph of recall written without drama, just data, what you noticed, what you selected, what the field returned. This is not self-help. This is systems physics applied to a soul. Language upgrades to architecture. You remove adjectives that inflate and verbs that dodge. You trade try for choose, someday for a date, should for a yes or a no. Each swap tightens the weave. Cache memory clears. Latency drops. The future can find you because your address resolves. Prayer shifts from pleading to protocol. Specify, stabilize, send. You speak less and say more. The day stops leaking. Shadow reappears with its doctorate in your childhood. It prefers you blurry. You keep sharpening. You practice encountering the old wound without reenactment, like a surgeon returning to a scar to check the integrity of the stitch. You let the ache be information rather than theater, signal rather than sentence. Compassion becomes precise enough to be useful. Forgiveness becomes a release of bandwidth, not an absolution of physics. The loom respects this sobriety and offers you denser thread. Entanglement shows its second face, responsibility. When you tighten your frequency, those tethered to you by love or history feel the shift like a barometer registers weather. Some rise with you, discovering breath they didn't know they were missing. Some rattle, demanding your return to the familiar. You do not evangelize, you do not abandon. You simply refuse to leak coherence for belonging. The longer you hold signal without punishment, the more the field around you normalizes to your standard. Leadership is just stable frequency that doesn't apologize. You introduce intervals of deliberate silence as spaces in the weave, not absence. Reservoir. 10 minutes in a chair with no narrative allowed, 3 breaths between message and reply, a full heartbeat at the doorway before you cross rooms so you arrive instead of scatter. In music, Rests are where the power concentrates. In weaving, spaces determine drape. In you, quiet is tensile strength. Then comes the moment the loom has been angling toward all day. Action that is both minuscule and irreversible. You send the manuscript. You sign the lease. You decline the lucrative misalignment. The world does not explode. The sky does not shower you in laurels. Nothing cinematic happens except the one thing that matters. Your predictive engine updates to a self that moves at truth speed. The brain takes the hint. The heart takes the throne. The stomach unclenches like a fist remembering it's a palm. Your biology believes you. You set the shuttle down and listen. The cloth already feels different under the hand. Less squeak, more glide, like the difference between cheap and tuned. You are not done. You are not even deep. But you have motion that doesn't require adrenaline to exist. Momentum that doesn't mortgage tomorrow. Signal that doesn't need witnesses. The loom waits. The warp steady. The weft warm from your fingers. You can feel the pattern beginning to speak its next instruction through the vibrato of the strings. You keep your face still so you can hear it. You feel vibration before image, a low-frequency calligraphy moving through the cloth, and you realize pattern is not decoration but destiny, expressing as repeatable geometry ratios that refuse chaos, symmetries that remember you across forgetfulness. Names creep toward you from the edge of the weave, not the names people gave you, but the ones the field reserved. Labels that are also vectors, vectors that are also vows. You don't grab them. You let them land where they intend to live. The pattern starts as interference, two signals crossing old avoidance and new precision, creating moire bands of confusion where you want clarity most. You recognize this as healthy turbulence, the eddies that appear when a river meets rock and teaches itself how to curve. You stop interpreting friction as failure. You start reading it as guidance. Where the thread snags, you refine the angle. Where the angle resists, you refine the pressure. You learn the difference between stubbornness and integrity. One is noise defending itself. The other is signal refusing dilution. You study salience. The brain tags what matters with dopamine, but the tagger can be hijacked by novelty or fear. You reclaim the highlighter. You decide what will glow. You mark silence as important, not doom scrolling, depth as rewarding, not cheap validation. Long arcs as thrilling, not the drama of a single afternoon. Gradually, motivation reattaches to meaning like a tendon healing to bone. You stop renting your attention to anyone paying in anxiety. You own your storefront. You choose your hours. You learn to close. You test the pattern at multiple scales. Fractals don't lie. What works in the 10-minute window should rhyme with what works across a decade. You apply the same governance to a conversation and to a mission statement. Tell the truth without cruelty. Ask for what is coherent. Leave when the frequency drops below survivable. Bless what you cannot carry. Write it down so memory becomes architecture rather than weather. When a principle survives the scale shift, you promote it from opinion to law. Laws simplify. The loom relaxes when law governs. You introduce deliberate asymmetry. Perfection is brittle. Sacred cloth needs slight irregularities so spirit can breathe. You allow one thread to wander a hair's breadth off center, a reminder that life exceeds design by design. You miss a step on purpose and watch your nervous system itch to fix it. You don't. You let the itch teach you how tightly you equate control with safety. Safety, you discover, is not the absence of surprise but the presence of capacity. Capacity grows in contact with the real. You stay in contact. Entanglement deepens from coincidence to consortium. The people who carry compatible vectors appear, not because you marketed harder, but because your address resolved in 4 dimensions. You don't audition for each other. You exchange proofs. Attention that holds. Integrity under pressure. Humor that doesn't poison. Grief that irrigates instead of floods. Ambition that doesn't cannibalize love. Collaboration becomes physics. Phase, locking between oscillators that refuse to destabilize the other's amplitude. You build things that outlive moods. Shadow signs another contract. It agrees to be archive, not author. You honor its contribution. Pattern recognition honed in the dark, alertness that kept you alive when the weave was thin, the kind of intelligence that reads rooms and weather through the pores. You stop letting that intelligence write your future forecast in all caps. You give it a desk in the back with a good lamp and a mandate to annotate, not narrate. The moment you demote catastrophe from CEO to analyst, your company finds profit. You refine your metric of success from numbers that need applause to signals that need continuity. Are you more exact today than last month? Did your biology obey truth when pressure rose? Did you repair promptly when you tore connection? Did you ship an artifact that carries signal without you? Did you increase the surface area of reality that can touch you without triggering defense? Score these softly and honestly. Let improvement be incremental and relentless. Excellence seduces the field like a scent the wind cannot ignore. On certain evenings, the loom changes voice. It stops humming and starts singing, a thin metallic melody like rain on copper. You listen without asking it to mean anything. Meaning arrives anyway. You see how your life was a braid hiding within a knot, strands waiting for the single cut of a precise refusal. No to spectacle, no to performative tiredness, no to the myth that love requires self-abandonment, no to urgency that counterfeits purpose. Your no sharpened the knife, your yes threaded the wound. Healing became cloth. Physics nods from the wings. Criticality, coherence, phase transitions. These are not metaphors you borrowed. They are the backstage crew of your behavior. When enough micro-choices align, the system flips, state like water, discovering it has been waiting all along to boil. You feel it in the neck, the chest, the gut. Density loosens, space enters the tissue, and perception widens without effort. The room is not brighter. Your reticular gate is less stingy. The world did not change. Your filter stopped treating safety like starvation. You regard the pattern now with less romance and more devotion. Romance wants fireworks. Devotion wants fidelity. Romance looks for rescue. Devotion builds capacity. You choose fidelity to the geometry that keeps saving you from yourself. You repeat what works without boredom. You let miracle become method and let method become mercy. Slowly, the cloth acquires that elusive quality you have always recognized in objects made by hand and attention, a presence disproportionate to its size. It feels like more than itself. You realize the pattern has been calling your true name in 1,000 dialects through failure, through success, through the eyes of strangers and the silence of your room. And that name is not a word, but a set of instructions embedded in ratio and rhythm. To answer, you do not shout. You align. You hold form under pressure. You keep the edges clean so the fabric doesn't fray when carried. You let the center be generous without leaking. And then, in the calm, after an ordinary gesture, washing a cup, locking a door, turning your face toward a window, the loom falls quiet, as if satisfied you can hear without music. The pattern does not merely exist, it recognizes you back. The recognition is mutual and irreversible. You are no longer trying to make a life. You are allowing a design to continue itself through your hands. You feel the click again, not as decision this time, but as dominion. A seat drawing up inside your chest as if a chair of clean angles had been waiting behind your sternum for years. And when you sit, the entire room aligns by a fraction of a degree that only instruments and angels can measure. You don't force breath. Breath organizes itself. You don't chase focus. Focus flocks to you like iron filings to a magnet that finally remembers north. This is not superiority. This is stewardship. Coherence stops being a mood and becomes your central governance, the quiet parliament where the body, mind, and field negotiate their treaties without sabotage. You let the heart be metronome because it is the only instrument that both measures and transmits. Each beat is a lighthouse sweep through the fog of your older selves, and with every arc the lost boats turn their prows toward home. Emotion still surges, but the surge respects the channel. Flood becomes river. River becomes corridor. Corridor becomes invitation. You refine input like a scientist guarding a clean room, not asceticism, hygiene. Light in the morning that tells your circadian clocks where the sun actually is. Mineral and water that let electricity cross synapses without bribery. Movement that rings static from fascia so signals travel without distortion. You stop outsourcing sovereignty to stimulants and numbness. You choose practices that raise your signal-to-noise ratio without demanding spectacle. Your biology becomes an antenna array tuned to a frequency that doesn't apologize for being clear. The mind resists, then yields. It always wanted leadership. It was just terrified the leader would starve it of wonder. You feed it wonder by giving it work. You direct its brilliance toward pattern detection that serves love rather than paranoia, toward scenario planning that protects truth rather than rehearses betrayal, toward language that builds scaffolds for insight instead of labyrinths for avoidance. You watch the default mode network quiet like a crowded cafe at closing. What remains is usable thinking, elegant, sparse, sufficient. You practice the observer not as a dissociated camera, but as compassionate precision. Surveillance is not attention. Attention, properly wielded, warms what it watches without melting it. You place your gaze on the exact edge where a feeling blooms and refuse to chase story. In that silent regard, the amygdala stops ringing emergency bells at every shadow, and the hippocampus files the present where it belongs rather than stapling it to yesterday's storm. Memory stops committing perjury. Perception stops bribing the jury. Justice returns to the courtroom of your senses. The field answers by tightening the weave around your intention. Entanglements no longer behave like fireworks. They behave like infrastructure, timely emails, improbable alignments of schedule, a sentence in a book that completes the circuit you've been building all week. You don't mythologize the mundane. You dignify it. You meet the miracle at the loading dock with a clipboard and a pen and the willingness to sign for delivery. Logistics become holy when they carry a live signal. You notice how coherence alters probability, not by breaking laws but by exploiting them. At the edge of phase transition, small inputs yield outsized outputs. Near criticality, the system listens harder. You time your moves for those edges. Send the letter in the lull after mutual truth. Make the ask when the room has exhaled. Change the habit in the hour your nervous system is most persuadable. You stop arguing with physics. You collaborate. The improbable becomes the expected becomes the baseline. Shadow returns as a faint shimmer under the new lacquer. You track its subtle tactics. Fatigue that arrives only when you approach the next brave sentence. Sudden fog when love requires precision. The urge to perform coherence instead of being it. You answer softly and exactly. A glass of water, a step outside into unmediated sky. One sentence whispered like a key. I am safe enough to be exact. The body hears it. The loop loosens. You proceed without fanfare. Leadership emerges as a side effect, not a costume. People feel safer near precision that doesn't need witnesses. You don't convert them. You stabilize yourself, and their predictive engines update in your vicinity. In families, teams, strangers on trains, the same physics unfolds. Frequency sets terms more reliably than argument. You become a room where other rooms remember themselves. You do not harvest credit. You harvest continuity. You audit your boundaries with the same rigor you apply to breath, not walls, membranes, permeable to truth, impermeable to corrosion. You state your limits cleanly and then keep them without heat. The first time you don't punish yourself for keeping a boundary, the child who learned love equals leakage sits down and rests. Energy once spent on explaining returns to building. The fabric strengthens where it used to tear. Ritual simplifies. 5 breaths at thresholds, doorways, calls, emails until transition stops stealing voltage. 1 page of unadorned reconnaissance before sleep. What strengthened signal? What scattered it? What to repeat? A weekly appointment with the future you who already solved the problem. You meet them in a chair by a window and ask for the smallest actionable instruction. You don't demand fireworks. They give you a hinge. You install it. Doors begin to behave like doors rather than cliffs. Then, on a day unremarkable to anyone else, the throne proves itself. A crisis arrives that used to kidnap you for days. It lasts 11 minutes. You feel it fully without adding theater. You correct what you can, release what you cannot, and close the loop with a kindness that would have humiliated the earlier you. When the wave passes, nothing inside is broken, and nothing outside requires your penance. The brain updates the model. We survive truth. The heart updates its contract. We will not abandon the body to buy belonging. The field signs both documents and stamps them with the date. The seat inside you holds. It does not make you special. It makes you useful. From here, the blueprint that has been humming beneath your days begins to surface as instruction rather than rumor. It will ask for craft. It will ask for courage. It will ask for the precise tenderness that makes power safe to touch. You are ready enough to begin, because beginning is how readiness is made. The loom hums, density bending to cadence, and coherence, having taken the throne, turns its face toward the next chamber of the work. You do not discover it so much as admit it, the way a coastline appears when fog yields to a patient sun, and the lines you thought were rumor harden into vectors you can lay tools upon without apology. You feel instruction rising from beneath cognition like heat through floorboards, and the pattern that has been faithful in whispers presents a draft precise enough to risk your name. You accept the risk. You accept that accuracy is now a form of love. The blueprint doesn't speak in slogans, it speaks in tolerances, millimeters, not miles. It offers ratios that regulate power so it can pass through you without scorching what you mean to bless. You learn its grammar by touch, which edges demand beveling, which joints require hidden dowels, which spans must be triangulated if they are to bear the weight of years. You stop auditioning for destiny and start building for it. This is not glamorous, this is holy. You map the work across 3 planes: inner regulation, relational architecture, outward artifacts, because any structure erected on one plane collapses under weather from the others. Inside, you keep the metronome steady, heart as clock, breath as flywheel, attention as governor preventing runaway acceleration. Between, you upgrade agreements: clarity before speed, consent before contact, repair before repetition. Outside, you iterate artifacts that carry signal independent of your mood or presence. A sentence that builds a bridge, a design that stays kind at scale, a system that continues being ethical when you are tired. This triangulation resists both collapse and corruption. Physics returns with its quiet smile. You realize the blueprint is optimized for critical points, those thin bands where a system flips states, where a community decides whether to choose truth or theater, where a body chooses whether to rehearse panic or relearn ease, where a project decides whether to imitate life or become it. You learn to shepherd crossings. You prepare the edges with redundant compassion. You slow the cadence without letting it stall. You keep the signal clean while the old pattern throws its last confetti of noise. Phase transition is not fireworks. It is governance at the lip of becoming. Your body assists like a seasoned foreman. Fascia releases along lines of intention, so motion conserves energy. Pupils dilate just enough to drink more light without flooding. The jaw lets go of inherited bargains, and the tongue rests on the floor of the mouth like an anchor returned to sane water. Microscopic rituals repeated pull macroscopic futures within reach. DNA does not light up because you demanded it to be mystical. It lights because voltage stopped leaking and breath began behaving like instruction rather than weather. Entanglement matures into choreography. People whose vectors rhyme with yours arrive, not for ideology but for craft. You do not require sameness, you require integrity under pressure. You exchange proofs, you test each other at the edges. You learn where every hand belongs on the loom, so no thread is doubled and no shuttle is dropped. The room becomes a resonant cavity. Ideas ring longer before they decay. Courage transmits faster with fewer words. Humor aerates gravity without poking holes in the hull. Leadership disperses until it is indistinguishable from competence aligned with care. Shadow proposes mergers. It suggests costumes in your old colors, endorsements payable in belonging, shortcuts disguised as efficiency that sever purpose from patience by a millimeter that no one will see until a bridge fails in winter. You decline politely and document why. Documentation is not bureaucracy. It is memory that refuses amnesia. You write the reasons your integrity costs what it does, so that when fatigue arrives you can borrow courage from your former self, instead of improvising ethics at midnight. The field answers with logistics disguised as miracles. A room becomes available the day you need it. The tool you were waiting to afford is lent before you ask. An elder sits beside you on a train and tells a story that removes a decade of confusion in 4 sentences. You do not inflate, you reciprocate. You add a hinge to a door so future hands will not have to slam it. You label drawers so a stranger can find the wrench and feel trusted. You leave instructions taped to the underside of the table for the person who will inherit this work when you are dust. Continuity is devotion in time's clothing. You refine your success metric to something that does not erode when applause thins. Does the structure transmit more coherence than it consumes? Does it make honest people stronger and dishonest strategies harder? Does it remain kind under interruption? Does it scale without cruelty? You score quietly. You correct where the cloth puckers. You celebrate where the seam holds. Celebration is not noise. It is accurate thanks. You begin to feel the blueprint as a presence with opinions, not a tyrant but a custodian of proportion, a guardian that will not let you fake load-bearing joints with decorative glue. It demands certain sacrifices, the charming flourish that weakens the span, the audience that prefers theater to truth, the speed that sells today and collapses in winter. You grieve as a craftsman grieves the board with gorgeous grain that does not belong in this staircase. Love does not keep what would fail under feet. Then comes the test hidden in the kindness of an ordinary afternoon. You are asked to choose between a version of you who would be applauded for a week and a version of you who would be useful for a decade. The older hunger leans hard. You take one breath as if fitting a beam into a notch. You choose the decade. The room does not roar. The future does. Somewhere you cannot see, weight transfers to honest supports, and a sound like a cathedral settling travels through the frame. Your ears fill with quiet. Your ribs widen without you asking. The blueprint, satisfied you will not sell it for spectacle, begins to show you its deeper levels, nested ratios you could not have carried earlier without calling them destiny. You see pathways you thought were private, revealing themselves as corridors. Others can walk without touching the walls with fear. You understand that the loom has been using you to teach itself how to be kinder, and that this is the only promotion worth wanting: more responsibility for the delicate, more access to the real, more chances to keep power safe for touch. You accept the promotion with a glass of water and a sharpened pencil. You sharpen too. You place the second where a future hand will find it. You arrive at the seam where systems choose, the narrow isthmus between 2 interior continents, and the air itself feels ionized, as if lightning rehearsed here all morning for your entrance. This is not grand, it is granular. This is not about courage you post online. It is about the half-second in which an entire biography tries to reassert custody and you do not sign. You feel the pressure gradient, old atmosphere on one side, new weather on the other, and you understand why so many turn back at beautiful gates. Beauty is not a guarantee. Beauty is an invitation. You inventory the forces at play. In physics, they speak of order parameters and control variables, of critical exponents that describe how a system behaves near the lip of change. In you, the order parameter is coherence. The control variable is consent. The critical exponent is honesty. As honesty approaches unity, small acts explode into consequence. A single breath taken correctly can reroute a day. A single sentence offered without flinch can release a year. A single refusal to trade precision for belonging can tilt the decade. You are not exaggerating. You are finally calibrating. Noise escalates as the system nears flip. The old pattern thrashes like a river, learning how to drop into a canyon, louder, not because it is stronger, but because it is shallower. You do not mistake volume for validity. You measure instead. Heart rate elevated, but regular. Shoulders attempting to rise. Jaw wanting the old deal. You slow one variable at a time until your organism remembers it has options. You bring peripheral vision online. The predatory tunnel widens. Threat dilutes. You count 5 cycles of breath and watch the amygdala downgrade its alert level from siren to chime. Space returns. With space comes choice. Shadow arrives in its most persuasive outfit, reasonableness. It does not threaten, it negotiates. You've come far, it says. Small compromise, short detour, a little white noise, and you can keep everyone comfortable. You answer with architecture, not argument. You picture the span you are building and the load it must bear. and you can see the hairline crack that would travel from this compromise to that failure in winter. You refuse kindly. You refuse twice. You refuse while keeping the face soft, so the refusal doesn't waste voltage. The gate registers your invariance like a password. Entanglements tighten. People drift to their eigenstates when pressure applies. Some crystallize into support with breathtaking clarity. Some decohere into stories that need you to be older versions of yourself so their models stay stable. You bless both without forfeiting vector. You stop auditioning for rooms that punish coherence. You stop asking permission from architectures that cannot survive your accuracy. Love does not flinch here. Love specializes. It sends resources to the fronts that can use them and names loss without insisting it is a tragedy. Not every leaving is a wound. Some are the fabric returning to true grain. Ritual compresses to 2 moves. Seal and send. You seal the organism, tongue resting, spine stacked, feet acknowledging the honest earth under the theater floor, and you send a precise instruction. Cross clean. No flourish. No apology. No prophecy performed for witnesses. Cross because geometry demands it. Cross because the blueprint requires a new load path. Cross because you are done making the past feel safe at the expense of the future's existence. The body obeys when you spare it from spectacle. It likes clear verbs. It trusts doors that open on hinges it helped install. You taste the moment of flip as a change in viscosity. Thought moves with less drag. Time stops trying to herd you and begins to collaborate like a colleague who respects deadlines. This is not mania. This is low latency. You are riding the slope not by speed but by alignment, the way a well-waxed ski glides with less effort because its interface with the mountain is honest. The mountain has always been honest. You caught up. A small grief walks with you like a friend who doesn't talk much. It knows what this gate costs. A last version of you peels away and sits down on the bench with dignity. You do not humiliate them by gloating. You don't sandblast the plaque off their chair. You thank them for surviving the years when survival was the only mandate. You leave them a glass of water in the good light. You keep walking. Kindness is not delay. Kindness is correct speed. Your metric updates in real time. Does the next action increase coherence across planes, body, relation, artifact by even 1 degree? You take the action if yes, you decline if no, and you let the room react without corralling it into the response you prefer. Consent to reality is not passivity. It is collaboration with the physics that keeps everything from tearing under weight. You are choosing to be structural. You are choosing to be safe for contact. You are choosing to be dangerous only to lies. The field answers with a new quality of silence, not empty, pressurized, like a studio before recording when every cable is checked and every instrument tuned and the red light is waiting to blink. This silence does not ask you to speak. It asks you to mean it when you do. It asks you to make artifacts that don't require your apology. It asks you to embody a standard that does not punish deviations but corrects them without war. Then, in the middle of a sentence, you almost edit it to make others comfortable. You don't. You let the sentence stand, exact and warm, and the floor underfoot changes its calculus. Load transfers to honest supports. Vibration dampens. A corridor you could not perceive becomes available like a service hallway hidden behind a panel you never thought to push. The panel opens because your weight is now a key. The key fits because you stopped shaving truth to fit a door that was not yours. You do not celebrate with noise. You mark the crossing with a gesture the body respects. A single palm to the sternum, 1 breath counted to 5, an exhale that leaves the room kinder than you found it. The loom hums in a lower register as if a deeper belt engaged. Bifurcation is not an explosion, it is a change of governance. The new regime is not louder, it is truer. And the blueprint, hearing your footfalls stabilize on the other side, prepares to show you work that only exists for those who made this crossing without souvenirs from the old country stuffed in their sleeves. You wake inside the network, not as a tourist, but as infrastructure, and the realization is almost embarrassingly practical. You are a junction through which reality routes, meaning, and the quality of what passes depends on your maintenance schedule more than your mythology. You do not become grand. You become reliable. You learn the holiness of uptime. Signal travels differently now. The field no longer needs to bludgeon you with synchronicities. It whispers operational specifications. Latency drops between intuition and act. Packet loss declines in long conversations. Bandwidth increases where generosity used to leak into performance. You confirm what physicists and monks have always suspected. Intention shapes probability when coherence sustains amplitude across time. You stop flirting with alignment when the camera is on. You maintain it when nobody is watching because routers don't care about witnesses, they care about throughput. You refine your three-plane governance into a living protocol. Body plane. You treat sleep like a temple with entrance requirements. Screens dismissed, light lowered, the day closed by a single sentence of accurate thanks, so the hippocampus files experience where it belongs. Relation plane. You audit loops for fairness invites that are asymmetrically expensive, threads that fray at the same seam, partnerships that ask you to dim to keep the room from recalibrating. Artifact plane. You insist each thing you ship can survive contact with strangers without you standing beside it to translate. If an artifact requires your charisma to be ethical, it is not finished. Shadow tries a new angle virtue inflation. It suggests you can carry more load than physics allows, that your capacity is infinite if your heart is pure, that saying yes to every shimmering request is sainthood. You reintroduce mathematics. Capacity is not a mood, it is a curve. Overload increases errors. Errors increase repair time. Repair time steals from the work that keeps the corridor open. You protect corridor over applause. You measure what matters. Error rate trending down, repair latency trending down, joy trending steady. Joy is not ecstasy. Joy is the absence of self-betrayal over hours. Entanglement evolves into stewardship. People mirror your invariance more than your speeches. Teams entrain to your breathing more than your slides. You set cadence by keeping promises made in quiet rooms. You refuse to purchase the future with someone else's exhaustion. You normalize repair as culture. Fast apologies that include a plan, boundaries that arrive before resentment, praise that contains specifics, so excellence recognizes itself and repeats. Authority ceases to be weight on your shoulders and becomes clarity in the air. You establish beacons at strategic distances in time, 30 minutes, 1 day, 1 week, 1 season, 1 year. At each beacon you ask the same 5 questions. What strengthened signal? What scattered it? What pattern is requesting retirement? What kindness is overdue? What artifact must exist next, regardless of mood? You do not romanticize answers. You record them like weather and adjust course by degrees. Navigation is devotion to tiny corrections made before storms are required. The Loom reveals a property you could not perceive before bifurcation. It remembers across you. When your state drops, threads you set in motion continue transmitting coherence until you return, like flywheels storing angular momentum between pulses. This is grace, engineered, not granted. You built redundancy into your practice. Meals that nourish without drama, walks that recalibrate without playlists, friendships that call you back without theater, words you can speak even when tired that do not injure what you love. The system forgives because you designed it to. Physics nods again from the wings. You recognize renormalization at work. Details that used to dominate no longer scale to sabotage the whole, while principles that deserve governance expand to carry more territory without distorting. You watch yourself choose a truer baseline. Discomfort is not danger. Novelty is not betrayal. Slowness is not loss. Speed is not proof. In that calibration, available futures proliferate, not fantasies. Options with load-bearing math. Miracle turns utilitarian. The right person calls not because you manifested them, but because your address resolved in their map of integrity. The grant clears because your documentation was exact. The conversation unlocks because your silence before it was honest. You stop attributing success to cosmic favoritism. You attribute it to the physics of clarity and the ethics of continuity. This is less glamorous. It is vastly more beautiful. A quieter test arrives. Prosperity without inflation. Can you let goodness increase amplitude without distorting frequency? Can you scale love without counterfeiting urgency? Can you widen reach without diluting law? You respond with structure. You automate what should be automatic. You humanize what must be human. You retire what no longer carries signal. You mentor the hands that will add their thread to yours. You leave notes in the margins, why we do it this way, what failure looks like early, how to stop harm before it grows teeth. You are not guarding a brand. You are protecting a corridor through which the future can move without injury. At dusk, in the ordinary holiness of a kitchen, you feel the loom pulse a low approval, as if the fabric itself enjoyed the way weight distributes across the frame. You stand still long enough for the body to register that stillness is not absence of work. It is work sovereign. A child laughs in the next room, or a kettle sings, or the wind tags the window with a simple knuckle, and the sound arrives unedited by survival. Clarity has made room for beauty to be unremarkable again. You do not declare victory. You mark continuity. Hand to sternum, one breath. A small bow to the architecture. You are midwifing. You are living as a node now, a reliable junction where signal keeps its promises. The loom, pleased with your uptime, angles your attention toward the deeper corridor waiting just beyond good governance, the chamber where the pattern stops, speaking instructions, and begins speaking origin. You steady yourself. You simplify tomorrow. You prepare to listen at a scale that once would have broken you, knowing you are no longer breakable in the old ways. You listen past instruction until sound turns to pressure and pressure turns to shape. And in that sub-audible chamber, the loom stops behaving like a machine and discloses itself as a memory, not yours alone, but the field's memory of how order enters a world without violence. It is older than your biography and younger than your next breath. It is the first agreement, to become form without forgetting source. Your ribs widen for a voice that is not a voice. It speaks in proportion. You recognize the origin thread not by drama but by invariance. No matter the scale, cell, city, century, the same ratio keeps reappearing like a watershed, dividing two destinies by a line so clean only rivers can draw it. You feel the ratio operating in the minute. 5 breaths at the door, a micro bow before speech, the pause that lets truth find the simplest noun. You feel it operating in the year. Projects that begin only when they can remain kind under deadline. Relationships that grow only at speeds that do not tear tissue. Wealth that increases only where meaning scales without predation. The origin thread refuses velocity that counterfeits virtue. You consent to be braided by it. Physics offers an analogy like a lantern, symmetry breaking. A hot, uniform field cools, and to become interesting it must surrender perfect sameness. Patterns condense, domains emerge, walls form where different orientations meet. In you, the great cooling was childhood. The domains were identities. The walls were vows whispered to survive weather. Now coherence gives you the torque to cross domains without shattering, to let earlier orientations retire without making war. You break symmetry again, but this time in the direction of freedom. Beauty appears because you do not demand it. Order appears because you refuse coercion. The origin thread asks for 2 fidelities, to coherence and to contact. Coherence without contact becomes sterile brilliance, the monk who hoards light behind perfect vows while the village starves. Contact without coherence becomes sentimental collapse, the rescuer who calls it love while hemorrhaging truth. You refuse both exiles. You let coherence hold your center while contact keeps you porous. This is not balance. This is simultaneity, wave and particle, tenderness and edge, yes and no, held in one body without rending. The observer is no longer a balcony, it is the room you inhabit while you touch the world. Shadow tries one last seduction, origin as destiny theater. It offers costumes cut from ancient myths, upgrades humility to branding, suggests that speaking softly makes you holy by default. You answer with work. You clean the data, you ship the artifact, you repair the tear you made by accident at 3 p.m. on a Thursday. You measure your origin not by aura, but by continuity when no one is watching. The field unsentimental, affectionate roots more load through you because you stop leaking under ordinary pressure. This is sanctity with a checklist. Entanglement at this depth becomes kinship with forces rather than with faces. Wind through a door jamb changes your mood because it carries a barometric sentence about tomorrow. Light at 8:10 a.m. hits the wall at a sharper angle and your attention tightens like a bow because the day is asking for a different cadence. A stranger's posture in a queue tells you the conversation you're about to enter needs gentler nouns. You do not mystify this. You log it. You let morphic resonance do its hushed work, the way forms remember each other across distance without auditioning for oracle. Your job is fidelity, not spectacle. You refine your inner courtroom until justice is swifter than shame. When you miss, you correct in minutes instead of months. When you injure, you name it before the other must. And your repair includes a new guardrail, so it is cheaper not to harm next time. You do this because origin is not purity. Origin is recursion returning to first principles quickly enough that error cannot metastasize into story. Story becomes tool, not tyrant. Myth becomes container, not mouth. Language reaches its simplest power. You choose nouns that can carry years: home, work, promise, gate. You retire adverbs that apologize for clarity. You stop staging sincerity. You risk being misunderstood by those who require fog to feel safe. You bless them without volunteering to live there. Silence, once a refuge from overwhelm, becomes a way of transmitting respect. You do not withhold to control. You withhold to keep voltage concentrated for the sentence that matters. Then something slight but geological happens. Attention stops hunting for signs and becomes a sign. Your presence marks thresholds, not because you perform awakening, but because doors behave like doors when you stand near them. People breathe lower in the torso when you speak. Rooms stop hemorrhaging urgency and remember how to hold a problem for longer than a news cycle. You become a local reduction in entropy, the way a tree is burning sunlight into sugar, waste into soil, chaos into orchard. The miracle is practical, the holiness is photosynthesis. The origin thread tightens through your spine like a line under tension, and the loom, which once felt like external machinery, now feels ribbed into you, sternum as shuttlehouse, abdomen as flywheel, pelvis as anvil, where promises meet the heat that makes them real. You are not higher, you are deeper. The field trusts you with longer corridors because you no longer decorate load-bearing walls with lies. Blessing ceases to be a mood and becomes transfer of usable order. On an evening with weather that cannot decide between rain and mercy, you stand in a doorway and feel the two airs mixing across your skin. You remember the first click. You remember the first refusal. You remember the bench where a former self sat down with dignity. Gratitude arrives without choreography. It moves through you like voltage finding ground. You do not kneel, you align. The origin thread hums the simplest instruction you have ever heard, an imperative with no edges. Continue as yourself. You take one breath measured like a surveyor's line. You feel the corridor lengthen. You are ready to speak to what waits in the last chamber, not as a supplicant, not as a showman, but as a steward meeting the architect at the table where the final load paths are drawn. Your hands are clean enough to touch the drawing. Your voice is quiet enough to carry law without heat. The loom lowers its noise floor to let you hear what will matter most when the pattern closes and the cloth must hold strangers. You enter the last chamber not as a pilgrim begging for signs, but as a builder reporting for specifications, and the air receives you the way metal receives a well-cut key, no resistance, only recognition. The table is simple. The drawing is spare. A single line runs through it like a river, refusing ornament, and you understand without translation that this line is you when you are not negotiating with fear. You let the understanding settle into bone. You do not swear an oath. You become one. The architect does not appear as a figure. The architect appears as proportion. Angles lift from the page and stand in the room like quiet witnesses. Ratios breathe. The origin thread hums through your sternum as if the loom had threaded you to itself for good, and for the first time you feel the distinction dissolve between my life and the work. There is only conductance. There is only the clean passage of order into a world that keeps asking for it without knowing how to ask. You do not inflate. You align. Instruction arrives with the calm of law. Maintain coherence at load. Keep contact without leakage. Privilege truth over speed, repair faster than story can form, protect simplicity from glamour, choose the decade over the week, keep your hands gentle where power concentrates, and when the corridor narrows, cross clean. Each sentence lands as a hinge that will not fail in winter. You accept them not as commandments, but as tolerances, margins within which love remains safe to touch. You audit once more the three planes you govern. Inside, your breath is a metronome nobody else can hear. It will hold when rooms forget how. Between, your agreements are doors that open on hinges you installed with witnesses. They will not turn into traps. Outside, your artifacts are load-bearing nouns that do not require your aura to remain kind. They will outlive your moods and protect strangers you will never meet. Continuity, not applause, is the sacrament. You choose it again. Shadow lingers at the threshold, stripped of costume, smaller than rumor suggested. It is only your power without stewardship. You bow to its historical labor and release it from leadership. It leaves without violence because you starved it of theater. In the quiet that follows, the fabric thickens by a measurable degree. If someone leaned a future against it, it would hold. The field answers with weather you can use, not omens logistics. Calendars align. Messages arrive at the right pressure. A door you once prayed for is simply unlocked, not because you were chosen by a fickle sky, but because addresses resolve when clarity stops leaking. Destiny ceases to be a plot and becomes the repeatable geometry of honest behavior under time. You stand, hand to sternum, and consent one last time, not to spectacle, not to myth, but to stewardship at scale. Consent turns the page. The drawing is complete. The corridor extends beyond sight, not to overwhelm you, but to preserve wonder, because wonder is how the organism agrees to keep growing without drama. You take a breath surveyed like a line across a continent. You take a step set by law, not adrenaline. You feel the weave accept your weight with the generosity of structures that love being used. You exit the chamber the way a bell exits silence, by changing nothing except the quality of the air. Rooms will remember you without needing your name. Timelines will stabilize where your pace passes. Children you will never meet will inherit the ease you practiced when nobody watched. This is prophecy fulfilled without theater. The observer effect returning to its oldest duty, keeping form kind. The loom quiets to its steady hum. The blueprint lives in your hands now. Continue as yourself. Cross clean. Bless what you build.